Betrayal doesn't always arrive as a thunderstorm. Sometimes it walks in quietly with a smile and calls itself your friend. I was 24 when I met Marissa. Back then, I was in my second year of my master's program at the University of Florence. Life was messy, bright, and full of ambition, the kind of years where you think your friends will be with you forever. I had just moved out of my parents' apartment in Siena and rented a small place near campus, one of those old Italian flats with creaky floors, high ceilings, and a window that looked over a street full of coffee shops. That's where I met her, Marissa, at a study group for architectural design. She was sitting at the edge of the table, sketching something absent-mindedly on the corner of her notebook, a swirl of lines that looked more emotional than architectural. When she noticed me watching, she smiled. "You're Clara, right? The girl who always carries 3 notebooks." I laughed, a little embarrassed. "You noticed?" She grinned. "Hard not to. You look like you're planning a revolution in those pages." That was the beginning. Within a week, we were inseparable. We studied together, grabbed espressos between lectures, and even shared playlists when we worked late into the night. Marissa had this way of making people feel chosen. Like if she liked you, you were suddenly part of something rare. And maybe that's why I missed the red flags, because in those early days, she felt like family. Her story pulled me in fast. She told me about her parents, strict, cold, never supportive. She said she grew up feeling invisible, always trying to prove her worth. I remember the night she told me her father once called her a disappointment because she didn't want to study law. She cried that night. And I sat beside her on my couch, holding her hand, promising her she'd never have to face anything alone again. That's who I was back then, the fixer, the protector, the one who believed love could save people from their own darkness. And for a while, it seemed to work. We celebrated birthdays together, skipped classes to wander through the city, and stayed up until sunrise talking about dreams, art, and men. Especially one man, Ethan. He wasn't from our program, he was studying economics, but everyone knew him. Tall, with that easy confidence that made people turn when he entered a room. We met at a student networking event. He was charming, funny, and had that kind of focus in his eyes that made you feel like you were the only person who mattered. Marissa was with me that night. I remember her nudging me when Ethan walked over, whispering, "He's totally going to ask for your number." And she was right. That night, I walked home under the glow of streetlights, my phone buzzing with his message. "Dinner tomorrow? I promise I'm better company in quieter places." Marissa squealed when I told her. "He's perfect for you," she said, grinning. "Finally, someone who looks at you the way you deserve." The next few months felt like a dream. Ethan and I became official, and Marissa was right there beside us, always cheering us on, always ready to plan double dates or movie nights. I trusted her completely. So when she mentioned that she'd be spending more time near Ethan's city, she lived only 30 minutes away, I didn't think twice. In fact, I encouraged it. "You should meet some of his friends," I told her. "They're a good group." She smiled a little too sweetly. "You really think so?" "I do," I said. "You deserve good people around you." If only I'd known how those words would come back to haunt me. That summer, everything felt easy. Ethan and I visited art galleries, went on weekend trips to the coast, and shared lazy mornings over coffee and music. Marissa texted often, sometimes photos of her day, sometimes just "miss you," messages that made me smile. But now and then I'd notice something off. A comment from Ethan about Marissa stopping by when I wasn't around. A small, strange hesitation in his voice when I asked how his weekend had been. Nothing dramatic, just moments that didn't quite fit. Once, when I was FaceTiming him late at night, I heard her laugh in the background. He said, "Oh, she just dropped off some notes from class." I believed him. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You believe them even when you shouldn't. The first real crack appeared a few months later. Marissa started becoming distant. She'd cancel plans, take longer to reply to messages, and when we did talk, she always seemed distracted, like she was living a life she didn't want me to see. I asked once if something was wrong. She smiled, that same practice smile, and said, "No, just stressed. You know how life gets." And because I was too kind or maybe too naive, I let it go. That winter, Ethan began to change too. He was colder, more detached. He'd make excuses for not seeing me, deadlines, friends, fatigue. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was too demanding, too emotional, too much. The thing about manipulation is that it makes you doubt your instincts before you doubt the person. And that's how betrayal hides behind your own self-doubt. By spring, it was over. I found out Ethan had been cheating, not with Marissa, not yet, but with another woman entirely. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He just sighed, as if I were an inconvenience. "I'm sorry, Clara. It just happened." I remember the numbness that followed. I packed his things from my apartment, one by one, folding memories like fragile paper, trying not to let them tear. Marissa came by that night. She held me as I cried. She said all the right things: "You deserve better, he's a fool, you'll heal." And I believed her. Because betrayal hadn't revealed itself yet. Not yet. Some betrayals are slow. They don't strike in lightning, they drip, steady and patient. Until one day, you realize you've been drowning. That realization would come almost a year later. And when it did, it would change everything. Sometimes the truth doesn't fall into your lap. Sometimes it waits, hidden behind laughter, behind photos, behind the people you thought you could trust. The months after Ethan and I broke up were a blur, the kind of time where everything moves, but you don't feel like you're moving with it. I'd wake up, go to class, come home, and pretend that I was fine. That was my performance, quiet, controlled, graceful. Inside, though, I was unraveling in slow motion. Ethan was gone. Marissa was still there, sort of. But something between us had changed, and I didn't know why. She would text occasionally, random updates about school, her new projects, and people she was hanging out with. Her tone felt off. Like she was talking at me, not to me. At first, I thought it was the aftermath of my breakup. Maybe she didn't know how to be around my sadness. But then, I started noticing things. Little inconsistencies. A pattern of silences that didn't add up. One day, I ran into Luca, a classmate of ours. He was part of our larger friend group, the kind of person who always knew everything happening on campus before anyone else did. We were standing in line at the coffee bar on campus, and he leaned toward me, smiling like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. So, he began, stirring his espresso. "You and Marissa are still close, yeah?" I frowned. "Yeah. Why?" He hesitated. "Oh, nothing. I just heard some things. Probably rumors." I forced a smile, but my stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" He waved his hand dismissively. "It's probably nothing. Just people talking. You know how university gossip is." And that was it. He changed the subject. But the words rumors and Marissa stuck in my mind like glass splinters. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every laugh, every "you deserve better" that Marissa had said after my breakup. And then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in months, a moment, just before Ethan and I split. He'd gotten a message late at night. I'd asked who it was, and he'd said, "Just a friend from your university. She's helping me with something." At the time, I hadn't questioned it. But now, I couldn't stop wondering. Which friend? A few days later, I visited my sister, Lucia. She was 2 years younger, studying literature in the same city. Lucia was blunt, fearless, and terrible at hiding secrets. So when she offered to cook dinner and said, "We need to talk," I knew something was coming. She poured me a glass of wine before she started. Her hands were fidgeting. That wasn't like her. "Clara," she said slowly, "I've been keeping something from you. But I think you deserve to know." My pulse spiked. "What is it?" She hesitated, eyes flicking away. "You remember Marissa's birthday party last month?" I nodded. "Yeah. I didn't go. I had that deadline." Lucia exhaled, her voice dropping. "Someone from her university circle told a story at that party. About her and Ethan." Silence. For a moment, I couldn't even process the words. She continued, "Apparently, when you and Ethan were still together, she and he." She stopped. "You get the idea." The air left my lungs. I felt like the room tilted. No, I whispered. That's not possible. But Lucia's face told me everything. I don't remember much of what I said after that. I just remember the sound of my heartbeat in my ears, too loud, too fast. Lucia tried to comfort me, but I barely heard her. All I could think about was every late-night text, every laugh I hadn't understood, every gut instinct I had ignored. And the worst part? Everyone knew. Not everyone, maybe, but enough people that it had become a story. A story told at parties. A secret shared like gossip. And I, the only one who hadn't known, had been the punchline. For days, I went through the motions. Work, classes, chores. But everything around me felt fake, like I was living inside a painting someone else had already finished. Marissa texted a few times that week. Little things. Hey, how's your project going? Wanna grab coffee? Each message felt like an insult. Like she was testing how long she could lie to my face. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because revenge, real revenge, doesn't come from rage. It comes from clarity. And I wasn't there yet. The following weekend, I had a choice to make. It was Marissa's birthday, the one Lucia had mentioned. She was throwing a joint party with a mutual friend, and half the department was going. My friends told me not to go. It's not worth it, one of them said. You'll just get angry. But I had a different reason to go. I wanted to see her face. To look at her and know, without saying a word, that I knew. The night of the party, I stood in front of my mirror for what felt like hours. My dress was simple, dark navy, understated. Not a revenge outfit. Not a declaration. Just me. Quiet, composed, unshaken. When I arrived, the room was already full, music, laughter, the smell of cheap wine and perfume. And there she was. Marissa. Standing by the bar, laughing, radiant, as if the world had never touched her. When she saw me, her face lit up with that same fake warmth I now recognized so easily. Clara. You came. I smiled, small, polite. Of course. Wouldn't miss it. She hugged me too tightly, like she was trying to make it real. And I let her. The night unfolded slowly. People danced, talked, and toasted. Marissa flitted from group to group like a butterfly, glowing, adored. But every time our eyes met, I saw it. That flicker of unease. The way she'd glance away too quickly. She knew. Or at least, she felt that something had shifted. And she was right. When the party ended, I didn't say goodbye. I simply walked out. And the next morning, I erased her. Every social account. Every message. Every photo. Gone. It wasn't anger. It was relief. Like closing a book that had been open too long. But this story doesn't end with silence. Because as much as I wanted to be done, I couldn't shake the humiliation, the fact that she had told our story to everyone. And if she wanted to make me a topic of gossip, then I was going to make sure she got the full experience herself. Revenge doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with whispers. And the truth, spoken out loud, to the right people. I didn't start rumors. I didn't need to. I simply told the truth. To the friends she'd lied to. To the people she had manipulated. Even to the professor she was writing her thesis with, the same professor who had guided me through mine. At first, I felt guilty. But that guilt faded the moment I saw what happened next. Her reputation crumbled quietly, piece by piece. People started distancing themselves. Her friends stopped answering her calls. The birthday group she'd posted dozens of photos with? Gone. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the villain in her own story. Months passed. Then one night, I got a message. It was from Marissa. Clara. I found out you know. And I'm so sorry. I hurt you and I didn't even tell you myself. I was a coward. Please, can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. I could almost hear her voice, shaky, uncertain. For a moment, a part of me wanted to respond. To say something. Anything. But then I remembered every tear, every lie, every moment she had made me doubt my own worth. And I closed the message. No reply. Silence can be louder than any scream. She messaged again 3 months later. Then again over a year after that. That time, she said she was in therapy. Her therapist told her to seek forgiveness. But her messages weren't about healing me. They were about freeing herself. And that's when I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who hurt you. It's something you give yourself when you stop caring about them. And I had already forgiven her. By forgetting her. Some betrayals end in rage. Others end in quiet dignity. But the rarest kind ends with indifference. When someone breaks your trust, it's not just the relationship that ends, it's the version of yourself that believed they never would. After Marissa's last message, life slowed into something quieter. No drama. No confrontations. No more late-night spirals wondering what I'd missed. Just silence, and I found it peaceful. But peace, I discovered, doesn't arrive fully formed. It's built, piece by piece, from the fragments you gather after the storm. That's what those next months were about, gathering the fragments. I stopped checking social media. Stopped wondering who was still talking about the scandal or who had quietly chosen sides. I started focusing on my final semester instead, my thesis, my internship, the little routines that stitch the days together. There's something almost therapeutic about exhaustion. When you spend your energy on things that matter, there's no room left for ghosts. Now and then, though, I'd hear her name whispered in the hallways. People said she'd withdrawn from her courses. Others claimed she was thinking of transferring. The truth was blurry, like all gossip is. And for once, I didn't care enough to ask. I still remember the exact day I realized I was truly free from her shadow. It was late spring. The air smelled like rain and jasmine, my favorite season. I was sitting outside a cafe downtown, grading internship reports, when someone called my name. Clara. I looked up. It was Daniel, a photographer I'd met months earlier at a student event. He smiled, kind, warm, the kind of smile that doesn't hide behind pretense. Mind if I sit? We talked for hours. About work, travel, and books. About life after betrayal, though neither of us used that word out loud. He told me about losing a friend who had stolen credit for his project. I told him, carefully, about losing someone I thought I could trust. By the time the cafe closed, the city lights had turned the pavement gold. For the first time in a long time, I laughed a real laugh. Not the polite one I'd learned to use to hide pain. Over the weeks that followed, Daniel and I became inseparable. He wasn't dramatic or intense like Ethan had been. He was steady, grounded, someone who listened more than he spoke. And somehow, in that stillness, I found healing. He never asked for details about Marissa or Ethan. He just asked who I was now, what I wanted next. That question caught me off guard. Because for so long, my identity had been defined by what had been done to me, not what I wanted to become. So I thought about it. I wanted to travel again. To paint, to write, to do things that weren't about proving anything to anyone. To build a life that was full, not flawless. Daniel encouraged every step. He helped me design my first solo art exhibit. And on opening night, as I stood surrounded by color and light and strangers who admired my work, I felt something settle inside me, the quiet certainty that I had rebuilt. Marissa and Ethan were no longer my story. They were just background noise in the prelude. A few months later, while clearing old files on my laptop, I stumbled across a folder labeled University Memories. Inside were photos from that time, trips, study sessions, birthdays. There she was, Marissa, smiling beside me, her arm draped across my shoulder like we'd never had secrets between us. I hovered over the delete button for a moment. Then I stopped. I didn't delete them. Not because I wanted to keep her memory, but because those pictures weren't hers anymore. They were mine. Proof that I survived the moment someone tried to rewrite my story. A year later, I heard through mutual contacts that Marissa had left the city. She never finished her degree. Apparently, after our fallout, her friend group dissolved quietly, like a house losing power room by room. She had moved somewhere new, started over, and disappeared from social media. And as strange as it sounds, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. People sometimes imagine revenge as this cinematic explosion, fire, shouting, confrontation. But mine wasn't that. It was just the steady silence of moving on while they stayed stuck. One evening, almost 2 years later, I got another message. It was short. Hi, Clara. I know I don't deserve to ask, but thank you for being kind to me when I didn't deserve it. I hope you're happy. No name, but I didn't need one. It was Marissa. I read it once. Then I closed my phone, turned off notifications, and went back to painting. Because that's what healing really is, not forgiving or forgetting, but reaching a point where you no longer need to reply. Sometimes, when people ask me why I don't talk about her anymore, I say, because I'm tired of giving villains the starring role in survival stories. The truth is, what happened taught me something precious. Betrayal doesn't end your story. It edits it. It cuts away the people who were never meant to be in your final chapter. In the quiet after the storm, you find out who you are, not who they told you to be. Daniel and I eventually moved in together. We built a home that felt nothing like the chaos of my university years, a place filled with books, art, and a little balcony garden that somehow thrives even though neither of us has much of a green thumb. Every so often, when rain hits the window and the city hums below, I catch myself thinking of that younger version of me, the girl who cried herself to sleep over people who never cared enough to stay. And I whisper softly, "You did it. You outgrew them." Because maybe the most poetic revenge of all isn't about ruining someone else's life. It's about rebuilding yours so beautifully that they'd never recognize the person they tried to break. Let them vanish from your story. You have better chapters to write. They say time heals all wounds. But that's not true. Time doesn't heal, it just teaches you how to live without picking at the scar. And for a long time, that's what I did. I lived. I built a life that didn't circle back to pain. One where laughter wasn't shadowed by suspicion. Where love didn't feel like walking on glass. 3 years had passed since the message. The one I never replied to. By then, Daniel and I were engaged. We'd moved into a sunlit apartment overlooking the park, a place filled with secondhand furniture, art supplies, and the smell of coffee in every corner. I had a new circle of friends, kind people who didn't carry old history. People who didn't know the version of me that cried on dorm room floors or reread texts at 3 a.m. And that anonymity felt like freedom. Life had turned a page. But closure, real closure, has a funny way of finding you when you've stopped looking for it. It came to me one autumn afternoon, completely uninvited. I was at a small gallery in the city center, one of those open exhibitions where local artists showcase their work. Daniel had a photo series on display, and I was helping him hand out pamphlets. The air smelled like varnish and espresso. People moved between canvases, murmuring polite praise. And then, just beyond the glass door, I saw her. Marissa. It took a moment for my brain to catch up to my eyes. She looked older somehow. Not in years, but in spirit. Her hair, once glossy and styled to perfection, was tied loosely in a bun. There were faint shadows under her eyes, not exhaustion, but something heavier. She hesitated at the entrance like someone debating whether they belonged inside. For a second, I thought she might turn around and leave. But then she stepped in. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing on each display. And then they found me. That brief, frozen moment, two people who once shared everything, standing worlds apart in the same room. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Just a faint, trembling smile. I could have walked away, pretended not to see her, ignored her the way she had ignored my boundaries years ago. But something in me, not pity, not curiosity, just calm, told me to stay still. She approached slowly, clutching her bag strap like it was the only thing holding her upright. "Clara," she said, voice soft. "You look happy." It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't envy. It was just honest. "Thank you," I replied. We stood in silence for a few seconds that felt like minutes. Then she said it. "I owe you an apology." Her voice cracked a little, and I could tell this wasn't rehearsed. She wasn't trying to win sympathy or rewrite the past. She was just tired of carrying it. She told me she'd gone through therapy. That she'd spent years replaying everything, the lies, the betrayal, the arrogance. She said she never realized how deeply she'd hurt me until she lost everyone. It was like waking up one morning, she whispered, and realizing I'd burned down the only bridge that led home. I listened quietly. Every sentence she spoke felt like a pebble dropped into deep water, small, but echoing. For a long time, I thought about what I'd say if this moment ever came. Whether I'd lash out, cry, or ask why. But standing there, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel much of anything. I had already done the hard part, letting go. So I told her the truth. I don't hate you, Marissa, I said. But I don't need to forgive you either. I just needed to stop carrying you around. She blinked, tears forming. That's fair, she whispered. It was. We stood in silence again, two strangers wearing the same memories. Then she said, I'm happy you're doing well. You deserve it. And before I could respond, she smiled, small, fragile, and walked away. Through the glass doors, back into the evening light. I watched until she disappeared into the crowd. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like punctuation. The end of a sentence that had dragged on too long. Later that night, I told Daniel what had happened. He listened, nodded once, and said, You handled it the right way. And maybe I did. Because the next morning, when I woke up, there was no heaviness in my chest. No replay of what-ifs or should-haves. Just sunlight pouring through the window and the quiet certainty that it was truly over. Years passed again. We got married, a small ceremony by the lake, surrounded by laughter, no ghosts in sight. I looked around that day and realized every single person there had earned their place in my story. No one was pretending. No one was performing. It was real. And I remember thinking, this is what it feels like when your circle is finally made of love instead of loyalty tests. Sometimes people ask me now, would you ever forgive her? I always smile and say, I already did. Just not for her. Forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their shadow block your light any longer. I never heard from Marissa again after that night. But every so often, when I pass that same gallery, I think of her. Not with bitterness, but with quiet gratitude. Because if she hadn't betrayed me, I might never have learned what loyalty really looks like. If she hadn't lied, I might still be chasing people who only clap when I'm convenient. If she hadn't broken my trust, I might never have learned how to rebuild myself stronger. Sometimes, closure isn't forgiveness. It's the peace that comes when you stop needing an apology. When people betray you, they often expect you to fall apart, to crumble under the weight of their absence. But there's power in surviving quietly, in letting your happiness be the loudest revenge. Because nothing unsettles the guilty more than watching the person they broke become someone they can't reach anymore. So all of it, became my closure. Not a door slammed in anger. Just one gently closed behind me as I walked into a better life. And if you've ever been betrayed by a lover, a friend, anyone you trusted, I hope you know this. You don't need to destroy them to heal yourself. You don't need to prove anything. Sometimes the real power is in the simple act of moving forward. Unafraid, unbothered, and unbound. Because once you stop seeking revenge, peace will find you all on its own. She hurt me once. But I healed 1,000 times stronger.